In a world where family loyalty is demanded and silence is expected, Mira's voice was the only thing left unheard. Forced to choose between love and freedom, trapped between a mother's ruthless control and a husband's cold indifference, she must find the courage to break free from the chains that bind her, not for anyone else, but for herself. This is a story about standing tall when everything tries to knock you down, about reclaiming your identity in the face of betrayal, and discovering that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to let go. Watch as Mira's world shatters, then rebuilds, stronger, fiercer, and finally free. The wind howled against the crooked windows of the old house as Mira stood at the edge of the hallway, her hands trembling slightly, a steel pot still warm in her grasp, the scent of simmered lentils rising in soft steam. Her eyes fixed on the living room where Victoria, Michael's mother, sat like a queen on a cracked leather throne, flanked by two women, herself and another, Zara, the new girl Michael had brought home without explanation, belly round, gaze defiant. It should have been a dinner, welcome, but instead it felt like a trial, and Victoria wasted no time confirming that, "One of you is lying," she said, voice like glass underfoot, "and I'm going to find out who." Mira's mouth opened, but closed again when Michael entered the room, expression unreadable, offering nothing but a glance before taking a seat beside his mother, as if his silence was obedience, or maybe cowardice, or maybe something worse. Zara didn't flinch, didn't blink, just placed her hand over her belly and said, "I'm not here to compete, I'm here because he asked me to stay," which only made Victoria laugh, dry and sharp. "You're here because I let you in, both of you," and then, turning her cold gaze to Mira, "Did you really think being first would make you the only one?" A moment of nausea climbed Mira's throat, but she swallowed it back and whispered, "He told me we were starting a family," and for a beat the room was silent, as if someone had sucked the air out of the walls, until Michael finally spoke, low and flat. "I didn't plan for this," which stung more than any lie. Victoria rose slowly, the kind of slow that makes people nervous, stepped between the two women and said, "He didn't plan, but I always do, and I will decide who stays and who goes, because this house is mine, and my son, well, he just lives in it." Zara laughed under her breath, but Mira could see her chest rising fast, like she was trying not to cry, or scream, or run, and that's when Victoria smiled, a tight little thing that meant war, and declared, "Tomorrow, you both cook for me, one dinner, one chance, one winner," before walking away without another word, her heels echoing through the empty hallway like the ticking of a countdown clock. Later, alone in the guest room she used to call hers, Mira stared at her reflection in the dusty vanity mirror, hands resting on her own stomach, flat, empty, silent, and wondered how things had turned so sharply, so suddenly. How the man who once kissed her fingers before bed now looked at her like a stranger, how his mother had become the gatekeeper of her future, and how this house, filled with baby name books and folded crib sheets, had turned into a courtroom where she was the one on trial. Behind the walls, laughter, Zara's and Michael's voice, low, intimate, muffled, followed by silence again, the kind that presses into your chest until it feels like drowning. Mira didn't cry, she wouldn't, not yet, but she did take a pen from the drawer, and on the back of a bill, she wrote just one word in shaky cursive, "Stay." The morning arrived colder than usual, light slipping through the curtains like it was afraid to enter, and Mira stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the ingredients laid out before her: potatoes, lentils, a few soft tomatoes, half a bunch of coriander, and it struck her how survival, in this house, now boiled down to a meal. Across the kitchen island, Zara was already chopping onions with terrifying ease, her gold bangles clinking against her wrist, her lips pressed into a firm, silent line, not smug, but focused, like she'd done this before, like she'd learned how to make war with nothing but a knife and a stove. Mira turned away, reached for the cumin, the turmeric, salt, trying to calm her breath, trying not to wonder whether Michael had spent the night in Zara's room, because she knew she already had the answer. The kitchen filled with the smell of spice and desperation, and outside the door, Victoria sat in her armchair in the hallway, knitting, listening, always listening, and when she called out, "You have until noon," the words cut through the air like a verdict. Mira worked quickly but her hands shook, and twice she burned her wrist on the pot, once she spilled water over the floor, and all the while Zara didn't say a word, didn't look at her, just stirred and sautéed like she was in control of her own fate, like this was just another game to win, and Mira hated her for that, not because she was cruel, but because she was calm. Michael passed through once, phone in hand, and when Mira whispered, "Will you at least taste it?" he paused for just a second, eyes flicking to the dish, then to her, and said, "Mom decides," before disappearing into the den again, and in that moment, Mira understood something deeper than disappointment. She understood abandonment. At noon, the table was set by the maids, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a floral tablecloth still stained from last week's tea, and Victoria entered like royalty, her perfume arriving a moment before she did, her gaze sweeping across both women like they were merchandise. She sat, folded her hands, and gestured toward the bowls. "Let's begin," and tasted Zara's first, 1 sip, pause, a nod, then Mira's, and the pause was longer this time, followed by a slight wince, then the infamous words, "Lacking coriander." Mira's chest tightened, not because of the criticism, but because she remembered holding the coriander in her hand and putting it back down at the last second, doubting herself again, like she always did when he wasn't on her side. Zara said nothing, but the twitch at the corner of her mouth gave her away, and Victoria leaned back with a smile, satisfied like a cat after the kill, then said, "Tonight, we'll talk next steps," and left without another word. That evening, Mira stood in the hallway outside Michael's door, listening to the low murmur of voices, his and Victoria's and Zara's, laughter threading between them. And she turned to leave when she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, tired eyes, oil-stained dress, hair pulled back in a rush, and she suddenly saw herself not as a woman, not even as a wife, but as someone erased in slow motion, background by other people's choices, and something deep inside her whispered enough. But before she could decide what to do with that feeling, the door creaked open, and Victoria stepped out, brushing past her with a smirk and the soft words, "Pack your things, dear. It's time someone made room for the real mother of Michael's child." She didn't remember walking out the front door, only the sound it made behind her, a deep, wooden sigh that felt like something permanent. And now Mira stood on the sidewalk with a plastic grocery bag filled with clothes, a toothbrush, and her phone charger, staring down the street like it might offer her some clue of where to go. But before she could take a single step, the sound of her name cracked the air. "Mira, wait." And it was Michael, barefoot, holding nothing, not even his pride, running after her with that same hollow panic he always summoned when he felt control slipping through his fingers. "She doesn't speak for me," he said, breathless, reaching for her arm. But she stepped back, and he hesitated, confused by her refusal, as if he still believed she was his to command. And when he said, "You know I love you," it sounded like a question, not a truth. "Do I?" And Mira almost laughed, because it had taken her until now to realize she didn't know the answer either. "Then why didn't you defend me?" she asked, and the pause before his reply told her everything. He wasn't used to being asked for accountability, only forgiveness. And when he said, "I didn't want to upset her," Mira shook her head, once, sharply, and replied, "And you never cared if she upset me," before turning away again, this time without hesitation. Hours passed, the sun dipped low, and Mira found herself in the corner of a cafe she used to visit with friends, back when she had friends, scrolling through her phone like it might tell her who she was before all of this, when a familiar name lit up the screen, Sharon. The one person who had seen the change in her eyes before Mira even knew it was there. The message was simple, "You okay? Come over." And just like that, she was on a train, headed across the city, watching the lights blur past like memories she didn't want anymore. Sharon opened the door with the kind of hug that said, "I missed you, but I'm also a little mad it took you this long." And Mira cried, really cried, for the first time in months, shoulders shaking against the fabric of a friend's sweater, not because she was sad, but because someone finally held her without asking her to be less. Later, sitting cross-legged on the couch eating noodles out of a takeout box, Mira told Sharon everything: Victoria's games, Michael's silence, the dinner that decided her future, the lie about the pregnancy, the coldness, the way her identity had slowly shrunk until she was just his wife and not a person anymore. And when she finally stopped talking, Sharon didn't say, "I told you so," or "You should have left sooner." She just asked, "What do you want to do now?" And that question felt heavier than all the years she'd spent pretending to be happy. "I don't know," Mira admitted, and Sharon leaned back, looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Then let's find out." The next day, they went shopping for clothes that actually made Mira feel like herself, and not someone trying not to offend someone else's mother. They got coffee, laughed, walked through the park like teenagers skipping school, and for a moment, Mira forgot she'd ever been anyone else. But that night, as they dressed for dinner at a small, rooftop restaurant Sharon insisted on, Mira chose a black dress, simple, elegant, with a modest neckline, and when she looked in the mirror, she didn't feel ashamed, or nervous, or afraid. She felt seen. But as they approached the table, her breath caught in her throat, because seated across the terrace, sipping wine, was Michael's mother. Mira saw her before she heard her, Victoria, perched at a table near the terrace edge, the city skyline glittering behind her like a crown. She believed she was alone, sipping red wine, calm as a woman who thought she'd already won. Mira's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen her since the night she was told to leave, discarded like worn-out furniture. Sharon, following Mira's frozen gaze, let out a soft, furious breath. "We can go. We don't owe anyone a damn thing." Mira shook her head. "If I leave now, she wins again." Her voice was even, but her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her dress. Sharon gave her a look, half warning, half pride, and led her toward their table. They were barely seated when Victoria rose, straightened her coat, and walked across the terrace with the measured grace of a woman who'd rehearsed confrontations like theater. "Well," she said, smiling without warmth, "if it isn't the runaway bride." Her voice sliced through the air like silk over glass. Mira didn't respond right away. She refused to let Victoria rush her. "Did you follow me?" she asked. "I don't chase," Victoria said, waving the question away. "But I hear things. And I like to check in on those who abandon their responsibilities." Sharon leaned forward. "Is that what you call it now? Emotional warfare is just checking in?" Victoria's eyes flicked toward Sharon with disdain, but she ignored the jab. Her attention returned to Mira, face softening into something almost pitying. "You could have had everything, Mira. A husband. A family. A home. You threw it away over a few disagreements." Mira blinked, slowly. "You mean being manipulated, insulted, replaced?" She leaned forward, her voice steady. "That wasn't a home. It was a prison you decorated with family photos." Victoria's expression cracked for a moment, then hardened. "Do you know where Michael is tonight?" "Home. With Zara. With our family. He's moved on, and you're playing dress up and pretending this is freedom." Mira felt a flicker of pain, sharp and real, but she didn't look away. "Maybe he has moved on," she said. "But I've woken up. And I'm not pretending anymore." For a moment, no one said anything. The clink of cutlery, the hum of soft jazz in the background, it all faded into a silence so thick it hummed. Victoria leaned in, eyes narrowing. "He was willing to forgive you. Even after you embarrassed him in front of our guests. You know that?" Mira's chest tightened. "Forgive me," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, but laced with disbelief. "For what? For not letting you control who I am? For not letting you decide whether I was wife enough, mother enough, woman enough?" Victoria's jaw locked. "You should be careful, Mira. A woman alone is free," Mira interrupted. "She's free." Sharon smiled then, slow and proud. "And far more dangerous than a woman pretending." Victoria stood straighter, eyes cold. "You'll regret this. You're still young. You think this is strength, but it's foolishness. When the world turns quiet, and no one picks up your calls, you'll miss what we gave you." Mira stood too, slowly. Her hands no longer trembled. "If silence is the price of peace, I'll pay it gladly." Victoria didn't respond this time. She turned, walked away, and didn't look back. As she disappeared into the dark, Mira sank back into her seat. Her heart was racing, but it felt different now, not panic, not dread. It felt like space. "Like air after too long underwater." "I'm proud of you," Sharon said softly. "I think," Mira whispered, eyes still fixed on the skyline, "I'm proud of me too." Michael showed up the next evening, uninvited, standing outside Sharon's apartment door like a memory Mira hadn't asked for, wearing the same shirt she used to fold with care, holding flowers he never brought when they were married. And when Sharon opened the door and saw him there, she didn't bother hiding her disgust. "You have 5 minutes," she said, stepping aside only because Mira nodded, not because he deserved the space. He stepped in like a man used to being welcomed, used to forgiveness, and his smile faltered just slightly when he saw Mira sitting calmly on the couch, legs crossed, phone in hand, not rising to greet him like she once would've. "I heard about what happened," he said, voice soft, carefully shaped like concern. "My mother can be difficult," and Mira raised an eyebrow, slowly. "Difficult?" "She tried to erase me," she said, "and you let her." Michael took a step closer, the flowers trembling just slightly now. "I didn't know what to do. I was caught in the middle, you know how she is." But Mira just tilted her head, like she was studying something she used to believe in and couldn't recognize anymore. "You weren't caught," she said, "you stood still and watched me drown." The silence that followed wasn't angry, it was worse, it was clean. Final. Michael opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I thought maybe we could talk." "Try again." "I made mistakes, but we had something." "We had silence," she interrupted, "and shame, and a house where I wasn't allowed to speak unless it suited you." He held out the flowers like a peace offering, and she didn't take them. "Look, Mira, I know you're angry, but I still love you," he said. "I chose you." "You chose convenience," she replied, and stood, slow and steady. "You chose comfort over courage. And I'm done loving people who only love me when I'm quiet." The words hit him harder than a slap, because there was nothing left to argue with, no tantrum, no accusation, just truth laid bare. He set the flowers down on the coffee table, like an apology no one asked for, and his voice cracked as he whispered, "You've changed." Mira looked at him, then really looked, and finally smiled. "I started listening to myself." That broke him. She saw it in his eyes. The moment he realized he couldn't guilt her back. Couldn't win her with regret. Couldn't pull her into another performance of forgiveness. "Goodbye, Michael," she said, not bitter, just done. He turned slowly, walked to the door, and before stepping out, he looked back one last time, hope flickering like a dying match. But she was already walking toward the window, opening it wide, letting in the October air that smelled like new things. Sharon didn't say a word until the door clicked shut. Then she walked over, picked up the flowers, held them out to Mira, who took them, not because they meant anything, but because she wanted to. She walked to the kitchen, found a glass, filled it with water, placed the flowers in with quiet care. "Why keep them?" Sharon asked. Mira exhaled. "To remind myself what not to go back to." And as the evening light spilled into the apartment, warm and soft and new, Mira stood taller than she had in years. Finally, fully, hers days slipped by like quiet breaths, each one less weighted than the last, as Mira began to reclaim the life she had lost in pieces. The apartment no longer felt like a refuge, it became a home, not because the walls changed, but because she changed within them. Sharon was still there, her steady presence a reminder that strength could be found in connection, not isolation. Mira spent mornings with sunlight pooling on her notebook, scribbling thoughts and fragments of a new story, one where she was the author, no longer a character trapped in someone else's narrative. She learned to say no without apology and yes without fear, tasted freedom in decisions as small as what to eat for dinner and as large as what kind of woman she wanted to be. One afternoon, walking through the city park, she watched a mother and daughter tangled in laughter, their joy effortless and wild, and something inside Mira softened, an ache for the family she might never have, but also a fierce gratitude for the family she chose, friends who saw her, believed her, and held space for her to heal. That night, as she sat by the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars, Mira took the wilted flowers from the glass, gently stripping each petal and letting them fall into the wind through the open pane. "Let go," she whispered to the night. "Let go." And as the petals scattered into the darkness, she felt the last threads of her old life unravel, no bitterness, no regret, only a clear, quiet hope that was hers alone to carry. Somewhere deep inside, a door closed, and another one, wide and sunlit, opened, a passage to a future uncharted but undeniable. She did not know what awaited her beyond that threshold, but for the first time in a long time, the unknown was no longer something to fear. It was an invitation. Mira turned away from the window and smiled, not because the path ahead was easy, but because it was hers to walk, with courage born from the wreckage of pain and the quiet strength of survival. The night settled softly around her, the city breathing in rhythm with her own heart, steady and alive. In that moment, Mira was no longer defined by the wounds inflicted or the battles fought. She was simply a woman standing in the light, ready to begin again. If Mira's story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful emotional stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of courage and truth. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Your support means the world. Thank you for watching.